The room fell silent in the way only expensive rooms ever do. Thick, controlled, and heavy with unspoken rules. 15 people sat around a hand-carved walnut table overlooking the dark water of Puget Sound, crystal glasses catching the low amber light as if nothing in this house had ever gone wrong. Then the screen on the far wall flickered to life. Imani Hart stood at the head of the table, her hands steady as she connected her phone to the display. For a brief, suspended moment, no one breathed. And then Ethan Vale appeared on the screen, her husband of 9 years, America's favorite kind of man, white, polished, smiling in a hotel mirror that wasn't theirs. A woman's laugh echoed faintly through the speakers, intimate and careless, as Ethan leaned into the camera and said something he had not said to Imani in years. "Oh my God," the whisper came from somewhere near the center of the table. A wine glass tipped and shattered against stone. Someone swore under their breath. Ethan surged to his feet, rage flashing across his face. Not shame, not regret, but fury that burned hot and bright. "Turn that off," he snapped, already moving toward the screen. Imani didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Sit down," she said quietly. "We're just getting started." If you've ever wondered what it looks like when power changes hands in real time, when the story someone has told about themselves for decades collapses in front of witnesses, you're about to see it. And if stories like this matter to you, the kind that expose truth, reclaim dignity, and refuse silence, stay with me. Like, comment, follow. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive. And sometimes being heard is the first step toward freedom. The dinner had been Ethan's idea. An anniversary celebration at his family's Bainbridge Island estate, a place so pristine it felt preserved in amber. Old money, old rules. Imani had worn black, not mourning, but armor. Her natural curls were pulled back cleanly, her posture impeccable. She had learned long ago that in rooms like this, a black woman was always being evaluated before she was listened to. Ethan's mother, Margaret Vale, had greeted her with a thin smile and a familiar line. "You look tired, dear. Still working too much?" The implication hung there, delicate and poisonous. Successful women were exhausting. Ambitious women were problems. Imani smiled back. She always did. Ethan had arrived late, as expected. He kissed her cheek like a campaign stop, whispered an apology about a client emergency, and took his seat at the center of the table. Golden son, trusted attorney, the man everyone assumed was exactly who he claimed to be. Dinner progressed the way it always did. Conversations about real estate, philanthropy, schools with waiting lists longer than most careers. Ethan spoke over Imani twice without noticing. Someone joked about burnout culture and glanced at her. She caught her reflection in the dark window behind them and barely recognized the woman who stared back, calm, composed, carrying something vast and dangerous inside her. When dessert plates were cleared and the staff retreated, Margaret clinked her spoon against a glass. "Before we end the evening," she said warmly, "Ethan and Imani wanted to say a few words." Ethan turned, surprised. "We did?" Imani stood. "I did," she said. She reached into her bag and removed her phone, the same device she used to run a multi-million-dollar crisis response firm, the same one that had changed everything 3 weeks ago. A thin cable followed, clicking into place with a sound far louder than it should have been. "This is just a small anniversary presentation," Imani continued, her voice smooth, deliberate. "Something I thought we should all see, together." Ethan's eyes met hers then, truly met them, and something flickered. Calculation, recognition, fear. The screen brightened, and in that moment, before a single word was spoken, before a single truth was named, every illusion in that room began to crack. The first thing that appeared on the screen wasn't a body or a bed or anything lurid. It was a timestamp. March 18th, 9:47 p.m., Chicago. White text, clean and clinical, the kind of label you'd expect in a boardroom presentation. It made the room feel colder, as if the truth had arrived wearing a suit. Then the image sharpened. Ethan Vale stood in front of a hotel mirror, tying a tie he had never worn for Imani. He looked relaxed, radiant even, like a man who slept easily because he believed consequences were for other people. Behind him, out of focus at first, was a woman's silhouette crossing the room. She laughed, low and intimate, and Ethan turned his head toward her with a softness that hit Imani like a fist. Not because she missed him, because she recognized the cruelty of what he had saved for someone else. At the table, a collective breath caught. A fork clinked against porcelain. Someone's chair scraped the floor as if their body was trying to leave before their mind could catch up. Margaret Vale's fingers tightened around her napkin, twisting white linen until it looked like a rope. Ethan rose so fast his chair fell backward. Imani, what the hell is this? His voice wasn't shaken. It was sharp, commanding. The voice he used in court when he wanted a witness to shrink. He took a step toward the screen, toward the cable, toward the power. Imani didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply lifted one hand, palm down, the smallest gesture of control. Don't, she said. A single syllable. Quiet. Absolute. Ethan stopped anyway, because the room stopped with him. 15 people, all trained their entire lives to protect the Vale name, suddenly unsure which instinct mattered more, loyalty or self-preservation. Ethan's cousin Graham, broad-shouldered and usually half asleep at family gatherings, stood up too, not to support Ethan, but to block him with his body. Sit down, Graham murmured, as if speaking to a dog that might bite. Ethan stared at him, stunned. The golden sun wasn't accustomed to resistance inside his own kingdom. On the screen, the woman stepped closer, and the camera shifted. Too smooth, too stable, as if whoever held it knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan smiled at the lens, then at the woman, then back at the lens again. You're going to ruin me, she teased. He laughed. No, he said, voice warm with arrogance. My wife is too busy saving the world to notice anything. There it was, not just betrayal, but contempt, served casually, like an appetizer. Imani felt something in her chest loosen, not from relief, but from clarity. The part of her that had once begged for explanations, the part that had wondered if she was asking for too much, fell silent, like an animal that finally realized the cage door was open. At the table, Sienna Vale's face went pale. She lifted a hand to her mouth as if to keep something inside. Shock, nausea, the sudden understanding that her brother's charm had always been a costume. Margaret's voice trembled when it finally came. Ethan, sweetheart, please tell me this isn't... Ethan's head snapped toward her. It's not what it looks like. The oldest lie on earth, but the screen didn't allow him room to perform. It kept rolling, merciless and calm. Ethan leaned into the woman's hair, kissed her temple, murmured promises like they were cheap and plentiful. I'm almost free, he said, just a little longer. Then we won't have to sneak around. I'll do it clean. Imani watched Margaret absorb that sentence in slow motion. The words, I'm almost free, did something ugly to a mother's face. It wasn't grief yet. It was the first crack of betrayal, not against Imani, but against the family myth Margaret had worshipped. Charles Vale, Ethan's father, sat rigid as stone, his jaw working. For years, Charles had treated Imani's success like a charming anomaly, useful for conversation, inconvenient for his ego. Now he didn't look at Imani at all. He looked at the screen as if he could intimidate it into silence. Ethan reached for his phone. This is illegal, he hissed, eyes narrowing at Imani. You can't, whatever you think you're doing. Imani finally stepped forward, just enough that the light caught her face. Her expression wasn't vindictive. It wasn't wild. It was controlled in a way that terrified people who were used to black women being dismissed as emotional whenever they told the truth. I can, she said softly, because I didn't break the law to learn who you are. His eyes flicked, fast, calculating, like he was scanning for the loophole he could exploit. You're lying. Imani nodded once, almost kindly, as if she understood why he needed to believe that. "You'll get your turn," she said, "but you're not the narrator tonight." On the screen, the video ended on a still frame. Ethan's hand on the woman's waist, his wedding band gleaming like an insult. The silence that followed was not shocked anymore. It was dangerous. Imani let it stretch long enough for every person in that room to feel the weight of what they had witnessed. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof, organized, time-stamped, impossible to laugh away. Ethan's voice dropped, low and threatening. "If you keep going, you'll destroy everything." Imani looked at him the way you look at a man standing in front of a house already on fire, insisting you stop striking matches. "No," she said, "you did that." Then she tapped her screen again. A folder open, projected for everyone to see. Neatly labeled, professional. The kind of thing you'd expect from a woman who made a career out of managing disasters. Veil, pattern of conduct. Beneath it, a second folder, smaller, darker in its simplicity, the title so precise it felt like a verdict. The exit strategy. Ethan lunged again, reflexive, panic. Graham stepped closer. Sienna stood up too, trembling but upright. Even Margaret rose halfway from her chair, as if her body didn't know whether to defend her son or shield herself from him. Imani didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She only said, "Watch." And the room, full of people who had spent their lives believing the Veil name could outlast any truth, realized, too late, that the truth had finally brought receipts. 3 weeks earlier, the truth did not arrive with a scream. It arrived with a sound so small it almost went unnoticed. A single, polite ping. Imani Hart stood alone in the kitchen of their Seattle townhouse, barefoot on cool stone, the city humming faintly beyond the glass. It was nearly midnight. Ethan was traveling for work, a phrase that had become so routine it barely registered anymore. She had his laptop open on the counter, not out of suspicion, but convenience. Their shared calendar hadn't synced properly, and she needed to confirm a flight before a morning board call. The screen glowed softly. Password accepted. Imani exhaled, scrolling through schedules and color-coded commitments that looked exactly like a successful marriage should. Meetings, dinners, conferences, a life that appeared full and legitimate. Then the ping. A notification bloomed at the corner of the screen. An unfamiliar app icon, muted gray, deliberately discreet. Still smiling about last night, her body reacted before her mind did. A tightening behind the ribs, a subtle heat at the base of her skull. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Years of running a crisis response firm had taught her the value of stillness in the first moments of impact. Panic wasted information. She clicked. The message thread opened with the intimacy of something long established. Not flirtation testing boundaries, but familiarity already inside them. Photos, nothing explicit but unmistakable. A reflection in an elevator mirror. 2 glasses of wine on a hotel balcony. A bare shoulder, cropped just enough to remain deniable. Then another message appeared, as if summoned by her attention. "You said she wouldn't be checking tonight." The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, as though the walls had shifted inward. Imani closed her eyes, not in denial, but in recalibration. She had lived through worse than this: abandonment, poverty, boardrooms where men spoke over her while praising her resilience like it was a novelty. She had learned, painfully and precisely, that the first story your body tells you is often the truest one. When she opened her eyes, she didn't confront him. She didn't throw the laptop. She didn't cry. She took screenshots, each one captured with care. Time, date, app name visible. No dramatics, no shaking hands, just documentation. She followed the thread backward. Weeks, then months. Different cities, different excuses she now recognized. Boston, Chicago, San Diego, all overlapping neatly with emergencies she'd never questioned because she had been busy building something that actually mattered. One message stopped her cold. "I'll be free soon. Just need to do this the smart way." Smart. Imani leaned against the counter, grounding herself, breath slow and controlled. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake made in weakness. This was planning. This was strategy. And suddenly, the loneliness she had been carrying for years, the quiet distance, the way Ethan had gradually moved out of her emotional orbit, rearranged itself into something horrifyingly coherent. She closed the laptop. Her phone buzzed in her hand as if it knew the moment required reinforcement. A text from Ethan, still at the hotel. Long night, miss you. Imani stared at the words, at the ease with which he lied, and felt something inside her fracture, not into pain, but into clarity. She typed back, get some rest. Then she turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a long time, letting the version of her life she believed in dissolve quietly around her. The next morning, she did not wake Ethan with questions. She did not search his face for guilt. She attended her board call on time. She approved a contract. She smiled at the right moments. She played the role flawlessly because she had been trained, by both necessity and prejudice, to remain composed under pressure. But the moment the call ended, she closed her office door and made a different kind of decision. Her first call was not to a friend. It was to her general counsel. I need you to listen carefully, Imani said, her voice steady. And I need you to tell me what not to do. There was a pause on the line, the kind that precedes seriousness. Are we talking about infidelity, her lawyer asked, or exposure? Imani looked at the city through her office window, glass and steel reflecting a woman who no longer felt confused. Both, she said. By noon, she had learned more about consent laws than she ever wanted to know. Washington was a two-party consent state. Audio recordings could destroy her case if mishandled. Emotional satisfaction was not worth legal vulnerability. Truth, to be effective, had to be clean. By evening, she had retained a licensed private investigator, not to spy illegally, but to observe legally. Public spaces, financial trails, metadata, patterns that could be verified without theatrics. The PI's voice was calm, professional. If there's something there, he said, we'll find it. And if there isn't, you'll know that too. Imani appreciated that. The permission for reality to go either way. 3 days later, the first report arrived. 5 days after that, the second. By the end of the first week, the question was no longer whether Ethan was cheating. It was how long he had been preparing to leave, and what he intended to take with him when he did. Imani sat alone in her office late one night, the city quiet below, documents spread across her desk in precise order. She felt the grief then, not loud, not cinematic, but deep and private. Grief for the woman who had trusted, for the years she had explained away her own instincts, for the version of love she had tried to earn by shrinking. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes. Then she wiped her face, straightened the papers, and began building a timeline. Because whatever Ethan Vale thought he was executing, he had underestimated one critical thing. Imani Hart did not panic. She planned. The first rule Imani Hart wrote at the top of a yellow legal pad was not about revenge. It was about restraint. Do nothing that could be used against you. She underlined it twice. In another life, one shaped by movies and myth, this was the moment where a woman stormed into the night with a phone raised, chasing the satisfaction of catching a man mid-lie. But Imani had spent her career cleaning up disasters created by people who confused impulse with power. She knew better. Emotion could fuel resolve, but it could not steer the vehicle. Truth had to be handled carefully, especially by a black woman in a world eager to label her angry, unstable, or vindictive the moment she refused silence. Her legal counsel, Marisol Vega, met her the following morning in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. Marisol didn't soften her words. She never did. Washington is a two-party consent state, she said, sliding a legal memo across the table. That means no secret audio recordings, no phone planted in a car, no just this once. You don't get to break the law because someone broke your heart. Imani nodded. She had expected nothing less. What can I do? She asked. Marisol's mouth curved slightly. You can document reality, cleanly, relentlessly, and you can do it in a way that no one can touch. That was how the team came together, not in secrecy, but in daylight. A licensed private investigator with 20 years of experience and a reputation for testifying well. A digital forensics examiner who specialized in metadata and cloud synchronization. A forensic accountant who had unraveled shell companies for federal prosecutors and didn't blink at complexity. No shortcuts, no theatrics. The investigator, Alan Price, laid out the boundaries in their first meeting. Public spaces only, he said. Hotel lobbies, parking garages, restaurants. If I can see it standing where any other citizen could stand, it's fair game. Anything private stays private. Imani appreciated the discipline. Boundaries weren't limitations. They were protection. The evidence came in layers, each one more devastating than the last, precisely because it was so ordinary. Credit card statements showing duplicate dinners on nights Ethan claimed to be in client meetings. Rideshare logs mapping routes between hotels and addresses that weren't his. Calendar entries that overlapped in ways no honest schedule could. The digital examiner reconstructed timelines from cloud backups Ethan didn't realize he'd left enabled. Nothing hacked, nothing stolen, just information he had already consented to sync across devices he shared a household with. This is the kind of thing juries understand, Marisol said during one review session. Patterns, consistency. People lie, data doesn't. Imani watched the puzzle assemble itself with a strange detachment, like someone observing her own life from behind glass. Each piece carried its own sting, but together they formed something larger than betrayal. They formed intent. Midway through the second week, the forensic accountant, Denise Carter, requested a private meeting. This part, Denise said carefully, turning her laptop so Imani could see, isn't about his personal life. It's about his planning. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Valuations, hypothetical settlement scenarios, language that stripped emotion out of a marriage and replaced it with leverage. He's been modeling divorce outcomes, Denise continued, and the assumptions are aggressive. Aggressive was a polite word. Ethan had commissioned analyses that framed Imani's company as volatile, overextended, and dependent on her erratic leadership. He had explored strategies to time a separation around a potential partnership vote at his firm. He had discussed ways to pressure a settlement before negative publicity could interfere with asset division. Imani felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a man who had strayed and panicked. This was a man who had planned. That night, alone in her apartment, Imani allowed herself to feel it fully. The anger, sharp and bright. The grief, heavy and intimate. The humiliation of realizing someone had mistaken her love for weakness. She cried until her chest hurt, until the tears ran dry and left her with nothing but clarity. In the morning, she went back to work. By the third week, the file labeled Veil had grown thick enough to carry its own gravity. Every document was indexed. Every screenshot logged with time, source, and method of collection. Red flags were annotated. Anything questionable was excluded without debate. We don't need everything, Marisol reminded her. We need what holds. The final meeting before the anniversary dinner was quiet. You understand, Marisol said, folding her hands, that once you show this, there's no rewinding the clock. Imani thought of the years she had spent explaining away her instincts, the meetings she'd left early to accommodate a marriage that had been eroding in silence, the way Ethan had smiled when she doubted herself. I'm not trying to destroy him, she said evenly. I'm trying to protect myself. Marisol met her gaze. Then you're doing it right. On the night of the dinner, as Imani slid her phone into her bag beside the cable and the neatly organized files, she felt something unexpected settle over her. Not rage, not fear, precision. Whatever happened next, no one would be able to say she acted recklessly. No one would be able to say she lied. No one would be able to dismiss her as emotional or unstable or vengeful. She had built the case the same way she built her life, methodically, legally, and without apology. And soon, Everyone would see exactly what that meant. Imani had believed she understood betrayal. She thought it was the intimacy redirected, the nights explained away, the casual cruelty of being replaced without consent. She thought that was the worst of it, the emotional theft, the erosion of trust, the quiet humiliation. She was wrong. The second betrayal revealed itself not in a message or a photograph, but in a spreadsheet. It arrived late on a Tuesday evening, delivered securely by Denise Carter, the forensic accountant, with a subject line that was deliberately neutral. Preliminary financial modeling, confidential. Imani opened the file, expecting numbers. What she found instead was intent. The document was meticulous, cold, and devastating in its clarity. Columns broke down her company's valuation across multiple scenarios. Rows mapped risk factors associated with her leadership. Notes in the margin suggested narrative framing for potential litigation. This wasn't analysis. This was rehearsal. Ethan had commissioned a full financial autopsy of her life's work. Her digital risk firm, built from nothing, grown through contracts she had fought for in rooms that never expected her to win. He had reduced it to a chessboard, moving pieces around to see how much he could extract when the marriage was no longer useful. Denise's voice was calm when she called. Too calm. "He's not planning a divorce," she said. "He's planning a harvest." Imani sat back in her chair, the office dark except for the city lights reflecting off glass. The words landed slowly, rearranging memories she hadn't known were evidence. The way Ethan had discouraged her from hiring an additional COO, too expensive, too risky. The way he'd suggested she delay converting contractors to employees. Flexibility is safer. The way he'd insisted certain accounts be kept joint for simplicity. It hadn't been concern, it had been positioning. Another file followed. Email correspondence between Ethan and a boutique divorce strategist, written in the language of men who believed they were smarter than consequences. "If we move before the next funding round, we cap exposure. She's volatile under pressure, can be framed as burnout. A controlled narrative will encourage settlement." Controlled narrative. Imani felt something shift in her chest, sharp and definitive. This wasn't about love lost or desire misdirected. This was about ownership, about a man who had mistaken proximity for entitlement and marriage for leverage. The most painful page came last. A draft memo, never sent but saved, outlining how to portray Imani in court if necessary. Work obsession, emotional reactivity, difficulty collaborating, history of instability masked as ambition. Each phrase was a familiar insult dressed up in professional language. Every stereotype Black women had been forced to outrun, weaponized by the person who had vowed to protect her. She closed the laptop slowly, hands steady, breath measured. This was the moment the story changed. Infidelity could be forgiven. Some people survived it. Some rebuilt after it. But this was predatory. This was a man who had watched her build something extraordinary and decided it should belong to him simply because he had stood beside her while she did it. Imani didn't scream. She didn't call him. She didn't throw anything across the room. She opened a new folder. Asset protection. The next 48 hours were surgical. Marisol brought in a trust and estate specialist. Accounts were separated cleanly, legally, with documentation that anticipated scrutiny. Intellectual property was inventoried. Access permissions were reviewed and tightened. Every move was reversible in theory, defensible in practice. "No sudden movements," Marisol warned. "You don't want to look reactive." "I'm not reacting," Imani replied. "I'm responding." Denise worked late into the night, tracing where Ethan had visibility and where he didn't. They found requests he'd made for internal projections under the guise of spousal interest. They found questions he'd asked that made sense only if he was planning an exit. They found timing. He had been waiting for a partner vote, for a favorable quarter, for the moment when her company was strong enough to be worth taking, but before it was untouchable. The realization burned but it also sharpened her. This wasn't a woman catching a cheating husband. This was a CEO neutralizing a hostile actor. That night, Imani stood at her office window long after the city had gone quiet, watching the lights blur into abstraction. She thought of the younger version of herself, the girl who learned early that stability could vanish without warning, that love was not the same as safety. She had promised herself she would never again be caught unprepared. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Anniversary dinner tomorrow. Mom's excited. Try not to work too late. The casualness of it almost made her laugh. Imani typed back a single word. Of course, she didn't sleep much. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. The pieces were aligning, not just to expose what Ethan had done, but to reveal who he was when he thought no one was watching. By morning, the grief had settled into something harder, cleaner, resolve. Ethan believed he had been playing a long game. He had. He just hadn't realized the board had already changed, and that the woman he thought he was outmaneuvering had been reading his moves the entire time. The first betrayal had broken her heart. The second had activated her. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m., slipping quietly into Imani's inbox, like a confession that had finally grown too heavy to carry. The subject line was painfully ordinary. I think we need to talk. No name, no context, just an address she didn't recognize, and a single sentence that pulled something tight in her chest. Imani didn't open it right away. She made coffee. She stood at the window and watched the city wake itself up. Delivery trucks, joggers, the steady rhythm of people who believed their lives were still predictable. She had learned over the last 3 weeks that urgency was often the enemy of clarity. When she finally clicked, the message unfolded slowly, as if written by someone who had rewritten it a dozen times. My name is Claire Novak. I work at Vale & Pierce. I didn't know he was married when it started. I found out later. I should have walked away. I didn't. I'm not proud of that. But there are things you need to know, and things I need off my conscience. Imani closed her eyes. There it was, the moment every betrayed woman imagines and dreads at the same time. Not the glamorous confrontation, not the cinematic apology, but the messy, human collision between two people caught on opposite sides of the same lie. Her first instinct was anger. Hot, immediate, justified. Her second was caution. She forwarded the email to Marisol with a single line. I haven't responded yet. Thoughts? The reply came 10 minutes later. Don't engage emotionally. Ask for facts and consent. Imani replied to Claire with restraint she had earned the hard way. If you're willing to talk, it has to be transparent and legal. No recordings without consent. No surprises. If that works for you, we can schedule a call with counsel present. The response came almost immediately. That's fair. I want this done the right way. They spoke that afternoon. Claire Novak's voice was nothing like Imani expected. Not seductive, not manipulative. It was tired, steady, controlled in the way of someone who had been holding herself together for too long. I didn't reach out to hurt you, Claire said early in the call. I reached out because I finally understood who he was, and I realized silence was protecting the wrong person. Claire had been recruited to Vale & Pierce 2 years earlier, drawn by Ethan's reputation and mentorship. He had been charming, attentive, validating in ways that felt professional at first. He spoke about Imani with admiration, brilliant, driven, intimidating to men who can't keep up. I believed him, Claire admitted. I wanted to. The affair, if it could be called that, followed a familiar arc. Long hours, shared travel, late-night conversations framed as collaboration. Ethan never pressured. He didn't need to. He cultivated intimacy the way some men cultivated influence, patiently, strategically, with plausible deniability. When Claire eventually discovered he was married, Ethan didn't panic. He said you were basically done, she said quietly, that you lived separate lives, that you cared more about your company than your marriage. He said he stayed because it was complicated. Imani listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She had heard echoes of this script in her own doubts, her own self-blame. Hearing it repeated by a stranger was like seeing handwriting she recognized too well. Claire paused, then said the sentence that changed everything. "There's something else, something I didn't realize was wrong until much later." She explained how Ethan had used firm resources to facilitate their relationship. Travel billing, client dinners miscategorized, confidential schedules. At first, Claire assumed it was normal privilege. Senior partners had leeway. That was the culture. But then came the night that broke the illusion. They were in a hotel room after a firm event. The door closed, the city blurred beyond the window. Ethan was relaxed, careless. He talked. He talked about clients, about leverage, about how easy it was to control narratives if you understood people's fears. And then he laughed. "The key," he'd said, swirling a drink, "is making them doubt themselves. Once they think they're the problem, you can do whatever you want." Claire had recorded part of that conversation, not secretly, not maliciously, but with Ethan's knowledge. She had been taking voice notes for work, documenting ideas. He knew. He didn't care. "I didn't record him to trap him," Claire said, her voice shaking for the first time. "I recorded him because something in my body said I needed proof of what I was hearing." Marisol intervened gently. "To be clear, Claire, you consented to the recording, and he was aware?" "Yes," Claire said. "He joked about it, said he trusted me." Imani felt a strange, disorienting sensation. Not triumph, not vindication, but sorrow. For Claire, for herself, for every woman who had mistaken access for intimacy and confidence for character. Claire sent the files that evening. They were devastating not because they were explicit, but because they were revealing. Ethan's voice was unguarded, contemptuous, strategic. He spoke of women as variables, of marriage as optics, of ambition as something to be managed, especially in women who had too much of it. When Imani finished listening, she sat very still. This was no longer just her story. This was a pattern. Claire sent one final message. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just don't want to be complicit anymore." Imani stared at the words, then typed back carefully, "You don't owe me purity. You owe yourself honesty. Thank you for choosing it." She closed her laptop and leaned back, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. Ethan had built his life on the assumption that women would either stay silent or turn on each other. He had underestimated the quiet power of truth shared without theatrics. The witness he never expected wasn't a rival. She was a mirror, and once held up, there was no way to look away. Imani had thought the worst thing about Ethan's betrayal was how personal it was. She was wrong again. The moment the phrase ethics violations entered the conversation, the ground beneath the story gave way, revealing a drop far deeper than infidelity or emotional cruelty. This wasn't just about who he slept with or what he planned to take. This was about rules he had sworn, professionally and legally, to uphold, and how casually he had stepped through them as if they applied to everyone but him. Marisol didn't sugarcoat it. "When personal misconduct touches professional duty," she said, tapping a file with her pen, "it stops being private. It becomes radioactive." The evidence from Claire reframed everything that had come before, not because it was dramatic, but because it connected dots that should never have been connected in the first place. Ethan hadn't simply used firm resources for convenience. He had used them as camouflage. Travel expenses coded as client meetings that aligned perfectly with personal encounters. Secure scheduling software access to track when certain clients or their families would be out of town. Confidential calendars used to avoid collisions between his professional obligations and his double life. He treated the firm like a shield, Marisol said, and the shield like a weapon. The most dangerous detail surfaced late, almost buried under spreadsheets and logs. One of Ethan's affairs involved a client's close family member. Not a rumor, not speculation, a documented overlap between a sensitive corporate negotiation and a private rendezvous that should never have existed within the same radius. The risk wasn't theoretical. It was catastrophic. "If this becomes public," Marisol said carefully, The firm won't be able to contain it. Judges, regulators, clients. This isn't something money smooths over. Imani felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear. This wasn't leverage she had sought. It was leverage that had found her. They moved slowly, deliberately, understanding the stakes. Nothing could be framed as blackmail. Nothing could suggest coercion. The difference between exposure and extortion was thin, and Imani refused to cross it. "We don't threaten," Marisol reminded her. "We present facts. Others decide what to do with them." The PI confirmed timelines. The digital examiner verified metadata. Every piece of information passed through a single filter. Would this survive scrutiny from someone who wants to destroy your credibility? Anything that didn't pass was discarded without debate. The more they uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Ethan had not compartmentalized his life. He had merged it. Personal indulgence and professional authority had blurred into something dangerous. A man who believed his charm made him untouchable, who assumed institutions existed to protect him rather than constrain him. "What happens to people like him?" Imani asked one evening, exhaustion finally edging into her voice. Marisol didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," she said finally, "nothing happens. Sometimes the system bends. But sometimes, when the paper trail is clean and the witnesses are credible, the floor drops out." The trapdoor. Imani understood the metaphor instantly. You don't push someone through it. You simply let them keep walking, unaware that the rules have changed beneath their feet. That night, Imani reviewed the materials alone. She listened again to Ethan's unguarded voice in Claire's recording, not for pain, but for comprehension. She heard the certainty with which he spoke about control, the ease, the absence of fear. He had believed he was invincible because he had never been meaningfully challenged. And now, for the first time, he was standing over a void he didn't know existed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Dinner's still on tomorrow. Try not to bring work with you for once." The irony was almost elegant. Imani typed back nothing at first. She set the phone down and looked at the files spread across her desk. Documents that could end a career, fracture a legacy, and redraw the balance of power in rooms she had never been invited to dominate. She wasn't angry anymore. She was precise. Ethan had spent years lecturing her about risk, about how one wrong move could undo everything she'd built. He had told her to be careful, to be patient, to think long-term. She smiled faintly at the symmetry. She had done exactly that. By the time she finally replied, "See you there," Imani knew something Ethan did not. The dinner wasn't a confrontation. It was a trigger, and once pulled, there would be no resetting what followed. The Vale estate on Bainbridge Island rose from the shoreline like certainty made architectural. Wide windows, clean lines, nothing accidental. The kind of place that suggested history without ever acknowledging who had paid the price for it. As Imani stepped through the front doors, she felt the familiar tightening in her shoulders, the instinctive calculation that came with entering rooms where power had never expected her to belong. Margaret Vale greeted her first, lips curved in a smile perfected over decades of social survival. "Imani," she said warmly, ere kissing her cheek. "You look thin. Are you eating enough these days?" It was delivered softly, almost kindly, and precisely aimed. "I'm doing well," Imani replied, matching the tone, the cadence, the performance. Years of practice had made this easy, too easy. The room filled quickly. Ethan's cousins, partners from the firm, family friends whose names carried weight in Seattle's legal and financial circles. Men in tailored jackets discussing acquisitions. Women comparing schools, boards, and charity galas with the competitive enthusiasm of generals planning campaigns. The language of privilege hummed through the space, casual, unexamined, absolute. Ethan arrived last. He entered with confidence, apology already prepared, smile calibrated to charm without humility. "Crisis at the firm," he announced lightly, as if the word itself justified absence. He kissed Imani's cheek, missing her eyes, and slid into his seat at the head of the table where everyone expected him to be. Imani noticed how naturally the room oriented around him, how conversations paused until he spoke, how assumptions bent in his favor without question. Dinner unfolded in courses and coded remarks. A partner mentioned burnout among high-performing women and glanced toward Imani with concern that wasn't concern at all. Someone else joked that ambition was admirable as long as it didn't interfere with family. Margaret nodded along, satisfied, as if this wisdom had been hard-earned rather than inherited. Ethan played his role flawlessly. Imani works too hard, he said at one point, smiling indulgently. I worry about her sometimes. She forgets to slow down. The words landed like a hand on the back of her neck. Imani felt the old reflex rise, the urge to explain, to soften, to reassure everyone that she was not difficult, not excessive, not a threat. She crushed it where it stood. Success does require focus, she said calmly. Some of us don't have the luxury of mistaking comfort for fulfillment. A brief silence followed. Not shocked, calculating. Ethan chuckled, a sound meant to smooth things over. Always intense, he said affectionately. That's what makes her brilliant. What it really did was reframe her statement as temperament rather than truth. Across the table, Sienna Vale, Ethan's younger sister, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes met Imani's for half a second, something unspoken passing between them. Awareness, doubt, fear of stepping out of line. As the main course was cleared, conversation drifted to ethics in business, sparked by a recent scandal at a competing firm. One of Ethan's uncles shook his head. Careers destroyed over bad judgment, he said. Reputation is everything. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. It takes discipline, he agreed. One lapse can cost you everything. Imani felt the moment crystallize. The hypocrisy was almost elegant. She excused herself briefly, stepping into the hallway where the walls were lined with photographs. Ethan at graduation. Ethan receiving awards. Ethan shaking hands with men who shaped the city. No room in the frames for complexity. No space for contradiction. In the bathroom mirror, Imani studied her reflection, not searching for reassurance, taking inventory. Her breathing was steady. Her hands didn't shake. The woman staring back at her was not afraid. She returned to the table as dessert was served. Something delicate, imported, unnecessary. Margaret lifted her glass. Before we end the evening, she said brightly, perhaps a toast? 9 years is something to celebrate. Ethan raised his glass, ready. Imani stood. I actually prepared something, she said, voice even, unhurried. Just a small presentation, an anniversary reflection. Ethan turned toward her sharply, surprise cracking his composure for the first time. That's not necessary, he said quickly. We're among family. That's exactly why it is, Imani replied. The room shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. 15 sets of eyes fixed on her. Not with respect, not yet, but with curiosity edged in suspicion. A black woman standing uninvited at the center of a space that had never needed her voice. Imani reached into her bag and withdrew her phone. The cable followed, sliding into the port with a soft, final click. Ethan's gaze locked onto hers, a silent command forming on his lips. Don't. Imani held his stare without blinking. The screen on the far wall lit up. And in that moment, before the first image appeared, before the first truth was spoken, the room filled with something far more dangerous than anger. It filled with anticipation. Because everyone, whether they admitted it or not, sensed what was coming. This wasn't a toast. It was a reckoning. The screen brightened, and with it, the room lost its warmth. Not because of what appeared. At first, it was only a title slide, but because of how it appeared. Clean, minimal, professional. The kind of opening that suggested intention, not impulse. Anniversary reflection. A timeline. A murmur rippled around the table. Ethan's smile stiffened, the corners of his mouth struggling to hold their shape. He half rose again, instinct screaming at him to interrupt, to dominate the moment the way he always did. Imani didn't look at him. She faced the room. "I won't take long," she said, voice steady, measured, unmistakably calm. "I know everyone here values efficiency." A few polite chuckles. Nervous, automatic. She tapped her phone. The next slide appeared. Two of contents, dates, contradictions, patterns, impact, no accusations, no adjectives, just structure. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. "This is inappropriate," he said. "You're embarrassing yourself." Imani turned to him then, slowly, deliberately. "If that were true," she said, "you wouldn't be afraid of it." The silence that followed was different from before. Sharper, alert. She continued. "Slide 1, she said, tapping the screen again. Dates. A timeline stretched across the display, months arranged in neat sequence, each marked with travel itineraries, billing records, and calendar entries. Cities appeared: Chicago, San Diego, Denver. Each one aligned with nights Ethan had claimed to be unavailable, unreachable, buried in work. Imani didn't narrate every detail. She didn't need to. The room filled in the gaps on its own. Margaret leaned forward, squinting. "These are business trips," she said, certainty straining her voice. "They were billed as such," Imani replied. "That's not the same thing." She advanced the slide. A hotel lobby photograph appeared. Public space, time-stamped, unmistakable. Ethan's reflection caught in glass, his arm around a woman who was not his wife. No nudity, no intimacy beyond what the eye could not deny. A chair scraped loudly as someone shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stood. "This is a violation of my privacy." Imani didn't raise her voice. "Everything you're seeing was collected legally," she said. "Public spaces, shared accounts, verified sources. Nothing stolen, nothing altered." She paused, letting that settle. "Slide 2, she continued. Contradictions. Text messages appeared, redacted where necessary, names blurred except for one. Ethan's. The words were familiar, casual, damning. Working late. Don't wait up. Client dinner ran long. Conference ran over. Beside them, timestamps from the same nights. Restaurant receipts. Rideshare logs. A hotel keycard entry. The room began to fracture. Sienna's hand trembled as she reached for her water. One of Ethan's partners frowned, calculating, eyes darting not to Ethan, but to the screen, already imagining headlines, depositions, loss. "This is selective," Ethan snapped. "You're cherry-picking." Imani nodded once. "Correct. Because relevance matters." She advanced the slide again. Patterns. Now the room felt it. Not a single incident, not a momentary lapse, but repetition, cities repeating, language repeating, excuses repeating with mechanical precision, the same phrases used with different women, the same reassurances delivered like a script. Ethan's voice appeared next, not in video, not exposed in any explicit way, but transcribed, attributed, sourced. "She won't notice. She trusts me. She always doubts herself first." A collective intake of breath swept the table. "That's taken out of context," Ethan said quickly, but the words lacked their former authority. Imani met his gaze. "Then explain the context." He opened his mouth, closed it. No one helped him. "Slide 4, Imani said. Impact." This time she hesitated, not because she lacked confidence, but because this part still hurt. "For 9 years, she said quietly, I was told, by him, and by implication, that my instincts were unreliable, that my concerns were stress, that my ambition made me difficult to love." Her voice did not break. "That was somehow worse. I adjusted. I apologized. I explained myself. I made room." She gestured subtly toward the table. This room. Margaret's face had gone pale. Charles stared at his folded hands. No one interrupted now. Imani straightened. "This presentation is not about humiliation," she said. "It's about accuracy, about seeing clearly what happens when trust is exploited and narratives are controlled. She looked at Ethan one last time. "You called this inappropriate," she said evenly. "What's inappropriate is assuming I would stay quiet just because you benefited from my silence." The screen dimmed slightly as she lowered her phone. No one spoke. Not because they were shocked anymore, but because the structure of their reality, the golden sun, the flawless marriage, the unspoken agreement to look away, had just been dismantled with bullet points and timestamps. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice low, urgent, stripped of charm. "If you keep going," he said, "you will destroy everything." Imani tilted her head, considering him the way one considers a man who has confused cause and effect. Then she tapped her screen once more. A new folder appeared, smaller, darker, unmistakable. The exit strategy. And for the first time that evening, Ethan Vale looked genuinely afraid. The silence didn't last. It never does. Margaret Vale was the first to move, pushing back her chair with a sharp scrape that cut through the tension like a blade. She stood slowly, spine straight, chin lifted, the posture of a woman who had spent her life believing dignity was something you performed, not something you examined. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "Imani, whatever grievances you have, this is not the place, not in front of family." Imani said nothing. She had learned that the first wave of defense was never about truth. It was about containment. Ethan seized the opening. "You see," he said quickly, turning to the table, "this is exactly what I've been dealing with. Public scenes, emotional escalation. She doesn't know when to stop." There it was, the pivot. He wasn't denying the evidence. He was reframing the problem. Charles Vale cleared his throat, heavy and authoritative. "Imani," he said not unkindly, "marriages have difficulties. Dragging private matters into the open like this helps no one." Private, the word hovered in the air, soaked in implication. Private meant inconvenient. Private meant controllable. Private meant silence. A family friend leaned forward. "Surely this could have been handled with a therapist," she offered gently. "Or mediation." Another voice chimed in. "Everyone makes mistakes. Ethan's under tremendous pressure." Mistakes, plural women, years of deception, financial scheming, reduced to a lapse. Imani finally spoke. "Notice," she said calmly, "that no one has asked whether what you're seeing is true." The table stilled. Margaret's mouth tightened. "Of course it's true, or at least partially true. But that's not the point." Imani met her gaze. "It is the only point." Ethan laughed then, short, incredulous, performative. "This is unbelievable," he said, spreading his hands. "I worked my entire life to support this family, and suddenly I'm on trial because my wife decided to make a spectacle." "A spectacle," Sienna said softly. All heads turned. Sienna Vale stood, hands shaking, color high in her cheeks. She looked at her brother, not with loyalty, but with something closer to grief. "She didn't fabricate timestamps," Sienna said. "She didn't fake the messages. You're not even denying it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "No," Sienna replied. "I finally do." Margaret rounded on her daughter. "Sit down." Sienna didn't. "I watched her shrink for years," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that you knew what you were doing." She looked at Ethan. "I was wrong." The room fractured. One of Ethan's cousins muttered something about disloyalty. A partner shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Ethan and the exits, already thinking about damage control. Margaret turned back to Imani, her composure cracking just enough to reveal steel underneath. "What do you want?" she demanded. "An apology? Money? To humiliate us?" Imani shook her head slowly. "I wanted the truth to exist in the same room as the lies," she said. "That's all." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "You're doing this to punish me." Imani stepped closer, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I'm doing this because you punished me for trusting you." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Charles stood then, towering, his authority finally wavering. Enough, he said. This family will not be torn apart by theatrics. Imani looked around the table, at the people who had dismissed her discomfort as ambition, her intuition as insecurity, her silence as consent. This family, she said evenly, was torn apart long before tonight. You just chose not to look. Ethan scoffed, desperation sharpening his tone. You think this makes you powerful? Standing there like some martyr? Imani met his eyes, unblinking. No, she said. What makes me powerful is that I don't need your approval anymore. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Margaret sank after her chair, hands trembling despite herself. The mask had slipped. Not fully, but enough. The family had fought back the only way they knew how. Denial, deflection, minimization, blame. And it hadn't worked. Because the evidence was still on the screen. Because the truth didn't need permission. And because, for the first time, the story they had protected for decades no longer belonged to them. Ethan was the first to say the word, as if naming it would restore order. Court. He spoke it with the confidence of a man who had lived his entire adult life inside systems designed to protect people like him. Court was where he knew the rules. Court was where evidence could be challenged, delayed, buried under procedure and privilege. This is all very dramatic, he said, straightening his jacket, reclaiming posture like armor. But none of it matters if it's not admissible. You know that, Imani. You're smart enough to know that. The shift was subtle, but immediate. Several people at the table relaxed, just a fraction. Court sounded familiar. Court sounded safe. Court suggested time, motions, filings, continuances. Time to reshape the story. Imani listened without interrupting. You've invaded my privacy, Ethan continued, warming to the argument. Some of this, if not all of it, would be thrown out. And if you think parading it around like this won't backfire, you're mistaken. He looked around the table, inviting agreement. This, he said, gesturing toward the screen, is not how adults handle conflict. Imani stepped closer, not toward him, but toward the center of the room. You're right, she said calmly. Court has rules. Ethan's mouth twitched, triumphant. So does the world. The words landed softly. Then everything changed. Imani reached into her bag again, slower this time, deliberate enough to command attention. She withdrew her tablet and woke the screen, its glow reflected in the widening of Ethan's eyes. What are you doing? He asked. Imani didn't answer him. She turned the tablet outward. On the screen was a draft post, clean, factual, meticulously formatted. Screenshots arranged with surgical precision, redactions in place, dates, sources. A narrative stripped of emotion and heavy with verification. Not a rant, a record. I consulted counsel before I wrote this, Imani said. Every line, every image, every word, nothing defamatory, nothing illegal, just facts. She scrolled slowly, letting the room absorb what they were seeing. Professional circles, she continued, don't require a judge to reach conclusions. They require credibility. One of Ethan's partners inhaled sharply. Imani, he said, choosing his words carefully. This would travel. Yes, she replied. It would. Ethan's confidence fractured. You can't threaten me with exposure. I'm not, Imani said. I'm informing you of consequences. She tapped the screen again. A distribution preview appeared. LinkedIn, industry forums, ethics review portals, journalist inboxes already drafted but unsent. Your clients, she said evenly, your firm, the people who trust you with confidential information, they'll see this. Charles stood abruptly. This is extortion. Imani turned to him, her gaze steady. Extortion is demanding something in exchange for silence. I haven't demanded anything. She paused. I'm deciding what truth I'm willing to carry alone. That distinction, clean, precise, cut through the room like a blade. Ethan's voice dropped, stripped of polish. You'll ruin me. Imani considered him, not as a husband, not as an enemy, but as a man confronting the limits of his control. "You did that," she said. "I just stopped protecting you from it." The power shift was now undeniable. Marcus Hale, one of Ethan's senior partners, spoke quietly. "If this goes public," he said, "we'll be forced to act immediately." Sienna swallowed hard. "This isn't just personal," she whispered. "This is professional suicide." Margaret sank back her chair, hands shaking. The family understood now, not emotionally, but practically. Reputation was the real currency here, and Imani held it. Ethan took a step toward her, lowering his voice. "Let's talk privately." Imani didn't move. "No," she said. "You don't get private anymore." The room was no longer divided between family and outsider. It was divided between reality and denial. Court could decide admissibility, but the world decided trust. And in that court, the verdict was already forming. The room held its breath the way a body does before impact. Muscles tight, nerves lit, everyone sensing the fall, but unsure who would hit the ground first. Ethan's bravado had evaporated. What remained was calculation, raw and urgent, the part of him that treated human lives like variables. He stared at Imani's tablet as if he could will the words to rearrange themselves into something harmless. "What do you want?" he asked at last, voice controlled only by effort. The question was supposed to put her on the defensive. It was an old move, force the other person to name a price so you can call them greedy for having one. Imani didn't flinch. She set the tablet down on the sideboard, not as surrender, but as proof she didn't need to clutch her leverage like a weapon. The facts would still exist whether her hands held them or not. "I want a clean divorce," she said simply. Margaret's head snapped up. "A divorce?" Ethan shot his mother a warning glance, but the word had already traveled through the room like a crack in glass, branching outward in thin, irreversible lines. Imani continued, her voice calm, almost clinical, because calm was a form of control Ethan could not steal from her anymore. "No contest to asset division. No smear campaign. No dragging my company into court like it's a prize in a lawsuit." She met Ethan's eyes. "You keep what was yours before me. Your family trusts. Whatever protection your name buys you, I keep what I built." Charles's jaw tightened. "That's not how marriage works." Imani didn't look away. "It is when the marriage was treated like a transaction." Imani nodded once, as if acknowledging a child who didn't understand the game had ended. "I'm not deciding everything," she said. "I'm offering terms." Silence again, but this time it felt like a negotiation table rather than a family dinner. Marisol stepped forward from the edge of the room where she'd been unobtrusive, present not as a threat, but as a boundary. "Imani's position is straightforward," she said, "and frankly, generous given what has been documented." Ethan scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "Generous," he repeated, as if the concept offended him. Imani's gaze didn't soften. "You wanted to take half of my company," she said quietly. "You planned it. You modeled it. You wrote narratives about my mental stability." Her voice dipped, not louder but sharper. "I'm still not asking for your inheritance. I'm not asking for a public spectacle. I'm asking you to leave what isn't yours." Sienna's eyes filled. She pressed her fingers to her lips as if trying to keep herself from making a sound. Margaret whispered almost to herself, "Ethan, tell me you didn't." Ethan's mouth tightened. "You don't understand what she's doing," he snapped. "She's threatening," Marisol cut in calmly. "Threatening would be unlawful coercion. This is a settlement discussion, and the difference matters." Imani turned slightly so the whole table could see her. "If this goes to war," she said evenly, "it won't be because I chose it. It will be because you forced it." Ethan's eyes flicked to the partners at the table. He needed allies. He needed someone to normalize him again. But the partners were already running numbers in their heads. Clients, reputational damage, ethics exposure. Their loyalty was not love. It was risk management. Marcus Hale, Ethan's senior partner, cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said quietly, "you need to think about what's at stake beyond you." Ethan's gaze snapped to him. You're taking her side? Marcus's face didn't change. I'm taking the firm's side. The statement landed like a slap, because it was true. And Ethan knew it. The room knew it. The family knew it. Charles's shoulders sagged, not from compassion, but from recognition. What else is in those files? He asked, voice rough. Imani held his gaze. Enough. The word carried more weight than a threat because it wasn't performative. It was factual. Ethan swallowed. He tried another angle, softer. Imani, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can. Imani laughed once, quietly, without humor. You don't get to offer me healing as a tactic. His expression tightened. So you want to punish me? No, she said. I want to be free of you. There it was, the line that made the air change. Not rage, not revenge, a clean severing. Marisol slid a single-page term sheet onto the table. Simple, elegant, designed to be understood. Ethan stared at it, then at Imani. And if I don't sign? Imani picked up her tablet again, waking the screen with a gentle touch. The draft post reappeared, calm and waiting. Then I stopped protecting the story you've been telling about yourself, she said. And you can argue admissibility while the world decides whether it trusts you. Margaret's eyes widened, the mother finally grasping the scale of what her son had endangered. Sienna's voice was small but steady. Sign it, she said. Ethan looked at her as if she'd betrayed him. She didn't look away. You betrayed all of us. For a moment, Ethan's face cycled. Anger, disbelief, calculation, a flash of panic. Then, slowly, his shoulders sank. Not in remorse, in surrender to arithmetic. He reached for the pen. The pen made a soft sound as it touched paper. It was almost disappointing how quiet it was, how unceremonious. No thunder, no shattered glass, just ink binding a man to the first real consequence of his life. Ethan signed. No apology followed, no admission. He slid the document back across the table like a chess piece he had been forced to sacrifice, jaw tight, eyes already calculating how much damage could still be contained. Imani didn't wait for the moment to feel satisfying. She stood. I'll have my attorney follow up tomorrow, she said evenly. Please don't contact me directly again. That was it. No victory speech, no tears. She gathered her phone, her tablet, her dignity, intact, and walked past a table full of people who no longer knew where to place her in their hierarchy. Behind her, the family collapsed into urgent whispers. But the real consequences did not wait for morning. They began landing before the ferry even left the dock. By sunrise, Marcus Hale had convened an emergency meeting at the firm. Ethan's name was quietly removed from 3 active cases, pending review. It was framed as procedural, temporary, neutral. Everyone understood it was none of those things. By noon, a major client postponed negotiations indefinitely, citing internal concerns. By mid-afternoon, the firm's compliance officer requested documentation Ethan had never imagined anyone would question. Pattern, once exposed, had a way of multiplying. Ethan tried to regain control the only way he knew how, through force masked as process. 2 days after the dinner, Imani's attorney received notice of a motion being prepared on his behalf. The language was familiar, almost nostalgic in its ugliness. Emotional instability, hostile behavior, career obsession interfering with marital duties. It was the same narrative he had rehearsed in private. This time, it didn't land, because the motion was never filed. Marcus shut it down before it could reach the docket. If you do this, he told Ethan behind closed doors, you turn a contained problem into an uncontrollable one. Ethan raged. He threatened. He accused. The firm responded with silence. That silence was louder than any verdict. 3 days later, an ethics inquiry was open. Not public, not yet, but serious enough to freeze Ethan's access to sensitive files. The partners spoke in careful language, but their eyes avoided his. No one wanted to be seen standing too close when gravity finished its work. The press noticed the absence before they noticed the cause. By the end of the week, Whispers move through Seattle's legal circles. A canceled appearance, a withdrawn speaking engagement, a profile quietly removed from a conference website. Imani read about it in passing, the way one reads weather updates about a storm that has already moved offshore. Her own fallout was quieter, but no less real. She woke up one morning unable to breathe, chest tight, heart racing, not from fear of him, but from the delayed impact of freedom. Her therapist called it the body releasing what the mind had been carrying too long. She didn't resist it. She rested. She canceled meetings. She let herself be human in ways she had postponed for years. Support arrived from unexpected places. An email from a former client. "I heard something happened. If you need anything, we trust you." A message from a woman she barely knew. "Thank you for not staying quiet." A handwritten note from Sienna. "I don't know how to undo the past, but I won't protect lies anymore." Margaret sent nothing. Charles sent a single sentence, weeks later. "I failed to see what was happening. I am sorry." Imani read it once, then she archived it. Ethan tried one last time to reach her. An email routed through a shared contact, short and strained. "You didn't have to destroy me." Imani stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. Destruction implied excess. What had happened was exposure. By the end of the month, Ethan's professional future existed in limbo, neither dead nor alive, just suspended in the space where reputations wait to see if they will be allowed back into the room. Imani's future, by contrast, felt startlingly solid. Her company didn't implode, it steadied. Clients stayed. Some even leaned closer, drawn by the unmistakable signal of competence under pressure. She had handled a personal crisis the way she handled professional ones, with clarity, legality, and restraint. People noticed. One evening, standing alone in her office as the city lights came on, Imani felt the weight finally lift. Not the pain, but the fear that had once accompanied it. She hadn't been destroyed. She had been tested. And she had passed without becoming what tried to break her. The consequences had landed, not as spectacle, but as truth, doing what it always does when no one interferes. It held. The quiet that followed the fallout was not peaceful. It was hollow. In the weeks after the signatures, the meetings, the silences that replaced conversations, Imani discovered the truth no one warns you about when they celebrate strength. Surviving something does not mean you walk away untouched. It means you walk away carrying what couldn't be seen while you were busy holding the line. The first night it happened, she woke gasping for air, heart hammering as if she had been running from something just beyond reach. Her apartment was dark and still, the city outside indifferent. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, only that something had gone terribly wrong and that she was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed until her breathing slowed, palms pressed flat against her thighs like anchors. She had negotiated multi-million-dollar crises without flinching. She had dismantled a man's double life with precision. And yet, here she was, undone by silence. Her therapist didn't call it weakness. She called it the cost of vigilance. "You were in survival mode for a long time," she said gently. "Your body didn't get a vote. Now it's speaking." Imani learned to listen. Some days that meant canceling meetings and sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, letting the weight of it all pass through her instead of around her. Other days it meant walking for miles through the city until her thoughts slowed enough to line up again. Anger came in waves, sharp, unexpected, sometimes misplaced. She found herself furious at small things, a delayed elevator, a careless email, a man interrupting her mid-sentence in a meeting. Each time she paused, breathed, reminded herself that rage was not the enemy, suppression was. What surprised her most was the grief, not for Ethan, for the woman she had been while loving him. She mourned the years she had explained herself into smaller versions, the nights she had doubted her instincts, the energy she had spent managing a marriage that had been quietly draining her long before it broke. Grief, she learned, did not ask permission. It arrived at odd hours, triggered by nothing more than a familiar song or the sight of a couple laughing in a grocery store aisle. She let it come. Support found her in fragments, not floods. Jade Rowan, her COO and closest friend, showed up without ceremony, dropping off food, sitting beside her in silence, never asking for updates or explanations. "You don't owe me productivity," Jade said once. "You owe yourself rest." Emails arrived from women she had never met. "I thought I was crazy until I read what you did. I left last night. I'm terrified, but I'm free. Thank you for naming things I didn't have language for." Imani read every one of them, slowly, carefully, aware of the responsibility that came with being seen. She did not reply to all. She couldn't, but she saved them. A quiet archive of proof that truth traveled further than she ever could. Sienna reached out again, this time not as a sister trying to atone, but as a woman trying to unlearn. They met for coffee on neutral ground, no family names between them. "I didn't see it," Sienna said, eyes wet. "Or maybe I didn't want to." Imani nodded. That's how it works. There was no absolution that day, just honesty, and strangely, that was enough. Ethan existed now only as a shadow at the edge of her life. Emails filtered automatically. Mentions in the industry she noted without interest. She no longer felt the need to monitor his trajectory. Whatever happened to him was no longer her burden. One evening, weeks later, Imani stood at her window as rain streaked the glass. The city blurred into reflection. She caught her own image there, tired, softer around the edges, but unmistakably present. For the first time, she wasn't bracing for impact. She wasn't anticipating the next crisis. She was simply here. The cost of what she had endured would never be zero. It had taken pieces of her: sleep, innocence, the easy belief that love was always safe. But it had given her something in return: clarity, and with it, the ability to choose herself without apology. Healing, she realized, was not about returning to who she had been before. It was about becoming someone who no longer abandoned herself to survive. And that, finally, felt like the beginning rather than the end. 6 months later, the mornings belonged to Imani again. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of her apartment, catching on clean lines and open space. No heavy furniture chosen to impress. No objects arranged to signal belonging. Everything in the room existed because she had chosen it. The quiet felt earned. The divorce had finalized without spectacle. No court battles, no public smear, just signatures, transfers, and a silence that stayed where it belonged, in the past. Ethan's name no longer appeared on her calendar, her accounts, or her mind. Whatever consequences followed him were no longer hers to carry. Her company, once something she had protected like a fragile thing, had grown steadier in her hands. Clients didn't leave. They leaned in. They trusted leaders who could navigate chaos without becoming it. New contracts arrived not because of sympathy, but respect. Integrity traveled faster than gossip ever had. Imani stood at the window with her coffee, watching the city move with familiar urgency. Seattle had always tested her. Now it felt like a collaborator instead of an adversary. She had changed in ways that didn't announce themselves loudly. Her hair was shorter, her posture easier. She spoke less, but when she did, people listened. Not because she demanded it, but because she no longer softened her truth to make others comfortable. The emails still came. Women leaving marriages. Women recognizing manipulation. Women saying, "I saw myself in your story." Imani read them slowly, understanding that survival was not the victory, transformation was. Some relationships had fallen away. Others had surprised her. Sienna remained, no longer out of obligation, but choice. A few new friendships formed quietly, without urgency or performance. And there was space, real space, for something more, someday, without fear or negotiation. That morning, as she prepared to leave for work, Imani paused at the mirror. She didn't search her reflection for approval. She nodded once. The new terms of her life were simple now. No shrinking, no silence for comfort, no love that required erasure. Only truth, only agency, only forward. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever questioned your instincts, your worth, or the cost of staying quiet, stay connected. Share your thoughts in the comments, follow for stories that reclaim power, and remember this: freedom doesn't arrive when someone else changes. It arrives when you decide you will not abandon yourself again.